to the CodePrep Podcast, the podcast that shows you how you can get into tech. Today's guest is Beth Laing. Beth is a mother, a bootcamp graduate, a certified Scrum Master. She's on the board of directors for TEDx Peachtree and a co-director for Women Who Code Atlanta. Women Who Code bills itself as the world's largest and most active organization supporting career-aged women in tech. As part of the leadership team for Women Who Code Atlanta, Beth has helped to mold that chapter into one of the 10 largest chapters in the world. Today, Beth will be sharing with us how she got into tech. So let's get started. Beth, can you tell our audience what is your job in tech and what is your daily life like in that position?
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. So I started my journey into tech, which has landed me as a software developer working at CNN and Turner. And so the department that I work in actually works on things that are sort of our customers or internal customers. So the things that you see when you go to CNN.com or the CNN app or things like that are not exactly the things that my department works on. We work on things like tools that the newsroom uses to put the stories on TV and further down the road onto the app and the website. And right now, the project that we're working on is called the content supply chain, and it's really how Turner organizes and puts movies and shows and sends them to a variety of locations. So this is a whole rethinking of the technology that is used organizationally to inventory and manage and then put content out for people to view.
Nice. All right. So I am fascinated by the concept of previous lives. Anytime I hear bootcamp graduate, I assume you had a career, a whole different life, and I would love to hear about what you did before, and more specifically, how it got you to a point to say, you know what, I'm going to do this boot camp, I'm going to shift and go in this direction. Like, what led you on this path?
So I started out in online newspapers, so I was always tech adjacent. So I worked at a variety of newspapers, and including launching Access Atlanta here in Atlanta a long time ago. And I moved around and worked for the San Jose Mercury News, and I worked for the St. Paul Pioneer Press. And all of those newspaper jobs were dealing with the online version. So this is when people still read a printed newspaper, and the idea of having an online newspaper was relatively new. So in that capacity, I was always dealing with developers and producers and things like that. A lot of it was new, and people were making it up as they went along. And it was really fun. And in between there, I did a stint at an internet startup, and that was really fun. That was a great ride, going through an IPO and things like that. But eventually, after having our second child, I decided that we were going to move back to Atlanta. And when we moved back here, I ended up working a part-time job as a project manager for 9 years. It was supposed to be a 6-month contract. It turned into 9 years. It was awesome. And so I kind of had this job that changed. It went through different iterations because the initial nonprofit then merged with this other nonprofit, and then they in turn spun off, and it was very crazy. But I got to do just such a wide range of things, everything from managing, redoing the website, working with and even looking and finding companies that would do that and evaluating them and going through the whole proposal process, to working on an annual event that took place at the University of Miami. So I had this very wide range of things that I was doing in the process, had a third kid, and eventually the kids got older. And I realized that I really had more flexibility, and it was time for me to think about what the next chapter for my professional life would be. I had always been sort of tangential to technology, but had never really gotten my hands dirty. So I decided that I would look into it. One of the first things I did was I went and did a Rails Bridge course, actually up in Athens. And it's a one-day course that's put on a lot of the time by Rails girls. And the nice thing about it is you actually sit down and you build something in this one day. And that's so powerful, because actually building something and seeing it work, it's very empowering. So after I went through that and survived, I thought, well, maybe I could do this. So I started looking around. I started going to a couple of meetups and things like that, which was always super intimidating, but kept doing it, started looking into boot camps, looked at several of the boot camps here in Atlanta, and then decided that I was going to jump in and do a full immersive program. So I guess I would say that my backstory is really having been tech adjacent for a long time and seeing the power of technology, and then deciding to jump into it myself.
Excellent. One of the things, a lot of people that are looking to get into tech, one of the paths that people consider is going through and doing a coding bootcamp. I myself am a coding bootcamp graduate. Valerie is a coding bootcamp graduate, and you yourself are a coding bootcamp graduate. Can you share with the audience about, do you think that that is a viable path for anybody, regardless of their age, to get into tech and to be able to use that as a stepping stone for getting into tech? And if you want to encourage people to do a coding bootcamp, is there anything that you would recommend on what they check into before selecting a coding bootcamp to use?
So I think that it is very viable to get into tech regardless of age and background. I think it's one of the places where you can prove what you can do, and with that ability, the world is really open. And I do think that a boot camp is a good path for that. I don't think that you have to go to a boot camp. I think a lot of people feel like they have to go to a boot camp, and I don't think that's true. I think it allows you kind of a shortcut. Not that it's short or easy, but it gives you some guidance. And one of the reasons that I decided to do a boot camp is because it gave me accountability. So there was something that I was supposed to do every day, as opposed to me figuring it out, which I think you can do, but it's a lot harder. And secondly, it gave me somebody to ask when I was stuck. And I know myself, and I knew that I needed that, and that was going to help propel me a lot faster than me searching and trying to figure out the correct way to do something. Because one of the things that's frustrating about spending a lot of time trying to figure something out is there's so much information out there, there's so much data out there, and trying to figure out which of it is actually information is a challenge. And then figuring out which answer you're going to listen to is really challenging. And Stack Overflow, for example, has a voting mechanism to help you determine what things are correct or best, but that you're counting on a lot of crowdsourcing there, which may or may not be accurate. So yes, I think boot camps are super helpful. They're not inexpensive, and so it's a super commitment that I think people should consider carefully. I know that there have been a lot of more flexible financing options that have been offered by boot camps, as far as you don't have to pay us until you get a job and things like that I think help people. But I also think that it's a little bit scary to take on that debt and not know how and when you're going to pay it back. So I would encourage people to be careful about that.
Yeah. So with the boot camp, we make jokes about it's not short and it's not easy. But the three of us laugh because we know we've all done it. But for someone who's maybe considering a boot camp, like what, in your experience, I'm guessing the three of us all had very different experiences, but in your experience, what are the sort of hurdles during a boot camp that you wish you'd known were going to be there? You wish you'd been able to plan ahead for and mitigate? For me, it was things like childcare on specific days and times. I wish that I'd thought ahead and known really when I would need to study. What do you wish you could go back and tell pre-boot camp you to plan for and strategize around?
I think one of the main things is just to not beat yourself up so much. I think that it's such a compressed experience that you're constantly like, oh my God, I didn't get this. Wait, I don't understand this. And you just sort of get yourself into a panic, or at least I did, like, oh my God, I'm falling behind. I'm never going to understand this. What's going on? And the other thing that is interesting is it took my cohorts, at least half the cohort, at least half the boot camp time to really start to pay attention to each other and help each other. And I think that's incredibly valuable because if you have somebody who depending on people's backgrounds, they may or may not understand something more easily than you do. And then, so being able to actually work together because we had 17 or 18 people and we had two instructors and one sort of assistant instructor. We didn't really have any TAs that were in the classroom with us. So especially once you start getting to projects, which is really the meat of doing things. If you were stuck, sometimes everybody was stuck at the same time. So there was just a very long line of people who wanted help with their specific thing. And once we started to work together, you didn't have to stand in that long line anymore.
Yeah.
Perfect. One of the things that you mentioned earlier when you were thinking about getting into tech was attending meetups, and you said that that was kind of scary. My question is networking. It's something that's important in tech. You and I both work together at CNN, and we both work together because of, knowing each other from outside of work. What do you recommend to our audience on networking? Would it be going to meetups, even if you're scared to do it? What advice can you give to people that they can do outside of just learning tech and learning program that can help them in getting into tech, and once they're into tech, to being able to advance their career by doing networking? What recommendations would you provide to people?
So I feel like my situation's a little bit different than a lot of people's in that I was already a fully formed adult. I already had kids. I had a career that was very successful. And so I thought that when I first went to some meetups, like, I can do this. It's no big deal. But there was something very intimidating about being at an event that there weren't other people that looked like me. So I was one of two women there. The other woman was a recruiter, and they were talking about things. This was the Atlanta JavaScript meetup long time ago, and the things that they were talking about, I was like, what are they talking about? So it was intimidating in a variety of ways, but just kind of taking a deep breath and just going, even if I didn't talk to anybody, just starting to go and learning some of the terms and some of the topics, even though I didn't really know what they were. Later, when I started getting into things, I was like, oh, I remember they were talking about this thing. And there was something really good about connecting those things together. So I did that very early on before I really started getting my hands into code and things like that, which was probably a little bit early, but I also like to gather a lot of information before I make a decision. So that worked for me. I don't think it was hugely valuable in a networking connectivity kind of way. When I was finishing boot camp, 4 of the people in my cohort got together and we started the Atlanta Angular meetup. So there was, at that point, I believe there was an Angular meetup out in Alpharetta, but there wasn't anything Angular specific in the very sort of more in-town area. So we started that, and we were lucky enough to be able to have our meetups at General Assembly at Ponce City Market, which is a really good location. It works for a lot of people, and the meetup really took off. And so one of the things that I did was I stalked people on Slack to find on the Tech 404 Slack to see who was giving good answers to questions specifically about Angular. And then I would message them and say, hi, I hope this isn't creepy, but we're looking for speakers for our Angular meetup. And so I met like amazing people like Jeremy Lickness and Dustin Goodman, and just a variety of people in this weird stalking thing that I did. So through that, I got to meet all these people. They came and they spoke at the Angular meetup. we put on a 1-day workshop, which was, we had no idea what we were doing. So it was this very elaborate 4-track. We had an ionic track. We had a beginner, advanced, and a beginner, intermediate, and advanced tracks of job. I mean, it was crazy, but it was really good. So in the context of that, I had also gotten a scholarship to attend RailsConf that was in Atlanta. And so through that, I got to go to the very early Women Who Code event where Sandy Metz spoke. And I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And that's how I got introduced to the Women Who Code network here in Atlanta. So I was at another meetup for the Women Who Code, and I mentioned our Angular workshop that was coming up. And that was that. And then I got a LinkedIn or a meetup message from somebody asking about the specific dates for that workshop. And that person happened to be Jennifer. And so I answered Jennifer, and she said, hey, now that you've graduated from boot camp, are you looking for a job? And I said, well, as a matter of fact, I might be. And so she said, well, shoot me your resume and I'll put it on my boss's desk. And so I did that. And that really, for me, solidified the importance of networking. And I feel like that was a perfect example of how you help somebody. Jennifer was not going to get me a job, but Jennifer was going to get me an interview. And by using her credibility in the organization, she was able to help me short circuit this interview process. Because if you see a job posting and you send your resume into that job posting, you're going to be going through an automated process that looks for keywords and so forth. And so if you're lucky, the HR person is going to look at your resume at some point. The way they're going to see it is probably not the way that you've laid it out. The way they're going to see it is going to be, these are the 10 things that match the 10 terms you put in. And then they're going to look and say, oh, I don't see any experience, especially at a large company where they ask for everybody to have 2 to 3 years experience. So getting through that front door is really hard. What Jennifer taught me was you can short circuit that. And so I did short circuit that. And I have taken that to heart, and I've tried to do that for a lot of people. And I tell people, I can't get you a job, but I can probably get you an interview if you fulfill at least, these 3 things. And that level of networking, I think, is invaluable. And finding people who are interested in an alternative source of potential employees is invaluable. So I sort of I cross department lines and try to make sure that if people are looking for an alternative pipeline, that I can help provide people to that pipeline. I have no idea if I just answered that question.
And
Perfect.
then some. You're speaking our language. You're talking about helping other people, which is sort of our raison d'etre. So we like to ask people for a recommendation, and I'm both giddy and I cannot fathom what you're going to recommend. I think about who you are, and how much you do and how much you've accomplished, and I am sort of beside myself. I would love to know, what is something that you would recommend to our listeners, something in tech or not, but something that can make lives easier, something that you find makes your life a better place to be. What is your recommendation for our listeners?
I think it's more of an attitude. And so what I mean by that is letting yourself be afraid and nervous, and just accepting the fact that you're uncomfortable, and that if you are comfortable, you're probably not progressing. So getting comfortable with knowing that you're not going to know something, and getting comfortable with understanding that you're going to go into situations and you're going to have to kind of fight your way out of them, and that's okay, and that it's okay to take time for yourself, and it's okay to say no. And I think that especially when you're getting onto this new career path, you put so much pressure on yourself, and you're like, oh my God, I need to do this by this date. You don't. You can do it in your own way, in your own time. there are certain things that you need to learn, but you don't need to beat yourself up about it.
That is so true because my sister had a bumper sticker that was attitude is everything, and it's one thing that gets you from point A to point B. Imposter syndrome is so prevalent in this industry. Having a positive attitude will help you go a long way and be able to get into things. The last thing that we want to ask you for a recommendation is what we share with people how to get into tech. The last thing to get into tech, so you've talked about networking and short-circuiting the process of getting in and getting an interview. The interview process, any recommendations that you can share with our audience on how to prepare for the interview process that will help them take that final step to get into tech?
So I would say, number one, especially if somebody has gone out of their way to help you get in, to get an interview and things like that, it's not a slam dunk. Like, you still need to prepare. You still need to be ready. So I would say, number one, taking time and practicing. So sites like exorcism.io are great because they give you little bite-sized challenges. And I wish I had done more of that, to be honest. Number two, I would say you should do a little bit of research on the company and the organization and as much about the department as you can before you go in. If you're interviewing somewhere and you don't know, if somebody's interviewing, for example, at CNN right now, and they don't know that AT&T has bought Time Warner, which owns Turner, which owns CNN, that's probably not great because it's something that a lot of people, we don't really know exactly what's going to happen. So that's kind of a topic that comes up a lot. You should know some basic things like that. You should know if the company is privately held, if it's publicly traded, just some basic things so that you sound knowledgeable. And really, why do you want to work there? I think being able to answer some questions like that is really important. And sometimes we get so wrapped up in the technical stuff that we forget that it's a company that we're going to be talking to, and we should know a little bit about them. And then the other thing is, I had a horrible interview. And I was like, oh, there's no way I'm getting this job. But one of the things that I was able to do that I think was my saving grace is talk about things and not just clam up and go, oh, I don't know, and get in my own head. But if you can say, well, okay, so in this question, this is this. And even if you're just repeating things that are very obvious, people want to see your thought process. They want to see how you approach something, that you're not just going to sit down and go, well, I don't know, and walk away. That's not acceptable. Even if you can't make it all the way through, the fact that you're like, okay, so I know this, I know this, I know this. Here's what I need to find out next, because so Jennifer mentioned imposter syndrome, which certainly is a thing, and we should all just accept that we have it. But I tell people who are struggling with imposter syndrome especially, are you asking the same question over and over again, or is your question changing? Are you progressing in the questions you're asking? Because that is a sign of success. And if your organization doesn't recognize that as a sign of success of you learning, then that's something that you need to help them understand.
Yes. Oh, I love that. I'm actually, it's hilarious to me. I'm working on a new talk for technology events on imposter syndrome. And I actually had a breakdown at one point while researching, thinking, I'm just not good enough to write this talk. And then after I had a good laugh, I was like, all right, Regis, get back to it. That is wonderful advice all the way around. And we'll definitely be sure to include a link to exorcism.io in the show notes.
And I think that, there's a bunch of sites like that, but that's, I think, a really good one. But whatever site works for you to have those challenges and keep it kind of your thought processes going, I think is super helpful.
Well, excellent. Well, Beth, thank you so very much for being our guest today on the CodePrep Podcast. We cannot thank you enough, and thank you, everybody, for listening today.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Valerie. Two of my favorite amazing speakers and technologists.
Thank you again.
Bye-bye.
Till next time.